Professor Richard Wolff, the Economist, has a solution to America's billionaire problem. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Talking about, the corrosive influence or impact on our society of great wealth, and how great wealth was, to some extent anyway, kept in check by through the period of the 1950s, 60s, 70s by a 91% top income tax rate. Which Reagan blew all to hell, and we never got back. We haven't been above 50% since then, like most developed countries are, on very, very wealthy people. But let's do a little deeper dive into all of this. How do we best deal with billionaires, and how do we best deal with the damage they do to our economy and our politics with Professor Richard Wolff, the Economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info. His latest book, The System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. rdwolf with 2fs.com is also one of his websites. Prof. Wolff is his Twitter handle with 2Fs. Professor Wolff, welcome back. How do we best deal with billionaires and the damage that they do to our economy and to our politics?
Well, I think we can dip into our own history. We have been a society that has always had, right from the beginning, part of our revolutionary tradition, a notion that equality in economic terms is part of what we ought to have. Poll after poll, including in the most recent months, indicates that Americans want less inequality overwhelmingly than we have. And when asked what they think we have, they underestimate how unequal it is. And that's partly because they don't want to believe that it is even possible to have the kinds of inequality that we now have. So I think we can dip into our history and look at what we did in the past. And here's a few examples of what could be done tomorrow. Number one, a proper estate tax. If you want to allow people to accumulate crazy amounts of money in their lifetime for whatever reason, okay, let's let that go for the moment. What about an inheritance tax? The basic idea always was that we ought to all start more or less on a level playing field. We shouldn't have somebody coming into the world scheduled to inherit billions or millions, and other people, looking to see if they can get another meal within the next couple of days. And it's not fair, and it's not equal, and it's unfair, particularly to the innocent new child being born, and that a level playing field is part of the democratic tradition, et cetera, et cetera. And on that basis, you really tax inheritance. We used to do that in the United States up until relatively recently, when we dropped both informally with all the escape clauses, but even the formal rates have been cut drastically. So I believe it's now about 11 or 12 $1 million that you can leave to your children before any federal tax applies to an estate.
And for historical context, it was the Republican President Teddy Roosevelt who campaigned for this, and I believe started the inheritance tax. Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, you got me there. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm not surprised that there have been people throughout American history. There are also state inheritance taxes where you can see the same idea at play across the 50 states, since they also have estate taxes that they apply, inheritance taxes. So that's one. Here's another one. In World Wars I and II, we had what was called an excess profits tax. If you were making money during those wars as an American, at the same time that your fellow citizens were giving up their lives fighting in foreign countries, presumably for the defense of the United States, the inequality between these two situations drove presidents like, for example, Franklin Roosevelt in his famous speeches in 1942 and again in 1944 to say this is unconscionable. That high tax rate you mentioned before, that came out of a whole procedure of saying we should tax people who are making money off of a war that is killing our fellow citizens, because the gap between these two is unspeakable. Well, look at it now. We have whatever it is now, close to 300,000 people dead from COVID, while a handful of billionaires have raked in, if I understand the numbers, in excess of a growth of $1 trillion to these a few hundred people over the same period of time that has killed 300,000 of our fellow citizens, that there's something so terribly wrong there. And here's the last one. It's sort of common sense. If you took away half of the wealth, I'll pick somebody, Jeffrey Bezos of Amazon. I don't have to pick on him, but he's the example these days. If you took away half his wealth, you taxed it for the general welfare of the society, he'd still be the richest person in the United States after you took away half, but the $100 billion you would get thereby could do dramatic things for the welfare and health of millions of Americans. In fact, it's such a comment on our society, Tom, that none of these people has even come forward voluntarily to propose doing this sort of thing. It gives you a notion of the harshness that we are descending into that I personally find scary.
Yeah, Nick Hanauer is a multimillionaire,
right.
A tech investor who, he started this group called the Patriotic Millionaires, who are calling for higher taxes on millionaires and billionaires. He's been on this program a number of times, along with Morris Black, I think his name is, and a few others. It's really an extraordinary thing. I'm curious your thoughts on this. As a homeowner in the United States, and slightly over half of all Americans are homeowners, or all American families are homeowners as opposed to renters. And even renters are paying this indirectly. But as a homeowner, every year I write a check for several $1,000s on my largest source of wealth, which is my home. That's worth more than anything else I have. And so I'm paying a wealth tax every year, every single year. And it's not a small tax. It's, 4 or 5% of the value of my home, essentially, or whatever, however they calculate it. It's huge. But if I, instead of having my home, my largest store of wealth was my money bin, it was $1 billion in a mutual fund, I pay no tax at all on that, unless I decide to take money out of it. Shouldn't we have a wealth tax for millionaires and billionaires that is similar to the wealth tax that, the majority of American families pay in the United States?
Absolutely. And the confusion around this really blows my mind. Let's go back to your house. If you have a house, you pay a property tax on the value of the house. If you rent the house out and earn rental income, you pay an income tax. One is a tax on the value of the property. The other is a tax on the income generated by the property. If you sell your house and buy an equivalent value of shares of stock, here in America, a very weird thing happens. You continue to have to pay income tax on the dividends and interest and capital gains you get from that stock. But on the wealth itself, no tax, no property tax. It's unspeakable that in our country we even dare call it a property tax, because it isn't. A property tax implies you tax property, but we don't. We tax property in the form of homes, of land, and of automobiles and things like that. The glaring, screaming exemption is a tax on property in the form of stocks and bonds and cash. No wealth tax is applied by the federal government and by virtually all the states on the wealth in that form that the wealthiest among us hold the bulk of our wealth. You and I talk about our home as our big wealth, but if you're in among the 1%, then the home is not your major wealth. Stocks, bonds, portfolios, and all of that kind of thing is. And to exempt that is an unspeakable tax injustice.